Hi, welcome to the Becoming Young podcast. I'm Josh. I'm here with Janae.
We are joined with Dr. Tyler Saunders again. And the most pressing question on my mind, Dr. Tyler, is what is your favorite drink? And I'm talking alcoholic drink here.
Right. Yeah. And this has changed over time. I mean, you go through different phases, right? And you're trying different things and things like that. And I think that and I hate part of this because Josh said this the other day and I'm kind of overlapping with him too. But, when it's like one of those special moments and it kind of fills that space, I'm thinking like, for me in my life and the relationships I had, it's probably Manhattan, right? Oh. And the reason for that is, and it's not because Josh likes it too, right? So, but the reason for that is that like every Christmas Eve with my grandfather who's recently passed, that's what we drink, right? Mm. And so like to me, that relationship and that is more. It means more than probably the actual taste of the drink. Mm. Although a good quality Manhattan, and Josh can agree, right, is good, right? So
I love that you brought in the quality of the experience in a relationship that's connected to that, because to me that's a really healthy connection with something nostalgic and somebody that you love. I really like that because when you connect things like that in your life, you get to create memories and habits and really look at a healthy lifestyle and how to incorporate that in a healthy lifestyle. Okay, so Josh, what's your favorite drink?
Now you get to go because otherwise I'm just a copycat. So you go.
Okay, I'm a red wine girl. I really love the indulgence of it and the flavor. I don't have a particular favorite flavor yet because I'm actually fairly new to alcohol. I didn't drink alcohol for the first 30, almost 40 years of my life. And, as I've just kind of like come into, okay, can I make this a healthy part of my life? And the answer for me is absolutely yes. Red wine just seems to be my go-to. I love the way it feels. I love the way it affects my body. I'm playing with cocktails. I had a have the last word last night because that's something that I'm trying to incorporate into my life is always having the last word. Not really, but I tend to like really citrusy and a little bit sour and grapefruit. And so I'm playing with those, but if I'm not playing with cocktails, it's just a red wine.
Okay, so we didn't actually talk about this before, so just for the record. So I prefer a rye Manhattan, typically something that's a 12 plus year vintage on a big rock with a Luxardo cherry. If you send me one with a maraschino cherry, it will get sent back. And I know that sounds...
Ooh, that's serious.
But let me tell you why. It's similar to what Tyler said. There's something about the experience of it for me that it is very... And during COVID, I probably overindulged a little bit in the beginning of COVID and had too many Manhattans. But there is something about the experience of it for me. And so when you sort of shortchange the experience, I feel like you've ripped part of that emotional response away from me. So I don't have any particular thing that's tied in for me, right? And it's going to be interesting as we talk about alcohol and that social aspect of that. I think you can see and pull that thread, right? The social. I mean, look at we've all talked about some very interesting emotional responses to alcohol, and that's very interesting. But yes, mine's also a Manhattan, so but I do that very sparingly now, just because it also makes it more special.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm clearly drinking with the right crowd here. And that brings us to our topic, which today is alcohol. Now, it's a touchy topic, but that's what we're going to talk about.
Just real quick, I want to introduce everybody and let everybody know about Dr. Saunders. Dr. Tyler Saunders is a board-certified doctor of osteopathic medicine in internal medicine. He is also an Institute of Functional Medicine certified practitioner, core faculty member for an internal medicine residency program, and the founder of HealthSpan Chicago. Dr. Saunders' current practice focuses on primary care with a strong emphasis on prevention. By integrating functional medicine, lifestyle medicine, and osteopathic manipulation, he aims to optimize health span and promote longevity for his patients. And he is my doctor. So,
and as you can see, he's doing very good work with Josh.
Without further ado,
Josh is doing the work. To be honest,
but he's making me feel like it's worthwhile. So that's
an important role a doctor needs to play.
It is. True.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about a WHO study, right?
So, and this is a controversial topic. So this is a recent study that came out from WHO on alcohol. Okay, so now that we've introduced what it is, we're going to be talking about alcohol.
So go ahead and stop watching this. We're not going to make you feel bad. This is not a feel bad episode.
Yes, so that means you can keep watching.
That's right.
Because we are going to talk about, of course, there's risks for substances, any substances at all. Yeah. But let's be honest, who in the audience just doesn't want to drink at all? I know there's going to be a few, and respect to that. And then there's those of us, myself included, who I really love to enjoy a drink here and there. And I've had a few moments in my life where I'm like, I'm probably over consuming. And probably all of us have felt that way.
Well, I think why this is really important to me, right, is so I belong to a club, a racket club. I spend a lot of times with primarily men because they have things organized into men's and ladies, times. But I'm spending a lot of time with men ages 40 to 65, right? And a lot of that is socially structured around drinking. And so I actually have a lot of conversations because I tend to be on the less rather than more side of drinking, right? I tend to drink water. I tend to drink, some sort of non-alcoholic beverage because of the way that I've structured my lifestyle, right? And so I've had a lot of conversations about, is it good to drink? Is it bad to drink? What is it doing to me? Should I stop? Is it okay if I feel better the next day? And ultimately, it's not a judgment, right? This isn't about making people feel bad or about making them really feel like they are less than, right? But I think it's important for people to be able to understand what the actual risks are here and then how to apply that to their own lifestyle.
Right. And as a responsible adult, really empowering our audience and each one of us to take control of our health, make decisions that work for us, not just in the context of, I want the best health I can, but also life enjoyment. Right. Yeah. And bringing in a doctor, that is your job. And by the way, Tyler is extremely efficient at that particular thing, really getting to know the patient, understanding what their goals are and helping them get there without, like what Josh was saying, the judgment or, but still using education and awareness to create, how do I make the best decisions as a patient?
Right. Yeah.
So take us through sort of what this WHO study actually, kind of the top level.
I think most people know WHO, but it's the World Health Organization, for those that we haven't said. But essentially what they were trying to do is they were trying to just take the data. There's a lot of data that they collect regularly and try to understand trends, patterns, and things of that nature. So the data that we're looking at goes back to 2019 because it takes a long time to accumulate all this data and bring it all together. And the question is, how many people have, essentially died as a result of alcohol in some way, shape, or form? And what they've estimated, about 4.7% of the total amount of deaths in the world were a result of alcohol consumption in some way, shape, or form.
Which is bonkers. That is a lot of people.
Right. That's a lot of people for something that we make a choice whether we do it or not. Now, you could argue that some people do not make a choice because of addiction and other issues related to that. And a lot of the data that we're looking at here, it's a lot of people that end up losing kind of control, don't necessarily have the control. And knowing yourself as an individual, that becomes a very important piece to what's going on. And like anything else, understanding if that is an issue, where you might need help and what to do. So, and I think the reason we wanted to bring this up, very, very relevant, the short story here with alcohol is that we're starting to learn that it's really not good for you, right? It's not like a healthy option. You're not doing this because you're being healthy. And I think a lot of times we thought about red wine as being this thing that this is going to make me live longer. And that's not particularly true, but at the same time.
But it was one of my favorite studies.
Yes. Everyone likes
Everybody
it.
liked that.
Everyone's eating Mediterranean diet because they get red wine. But so then the question is that, is it a part of a healthy lifestyle versus is it going to make you live longer, right? And that's the difference. And how much stock you put in drinking alcohol in terms of the immediate benefit versus the long-term detriment of it. And then it's kind of creating that balance between those two things.
So in that, when we all got together for the first time, we all got a happy hour cocktail,
We did.
And it can be a part of a healthy lifestyle. But what I also want to look at our objective is longevity. We want to live a long, healthy life. How does alcohol impact? Okay, so there's the joy factor. Like when we were all sitting down at the table, it was really lovely. Like it was really nice. And, a tiny bit of buzz from one drink of alcohol was, just really enjoyable. But then long term, what are we looking at?
Well, it's it's a lot to answer there. But the thing is that like we can break it down by particular categories. And that's what the WHO article tried to do. Or they tried to say like, well, let's think about it from a longevity standpoint. When we're talking about that in our practice, we think about core things that cause people to lose their life earlier than they should, right? Cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegeneration, dementia, and those things, as well as metabolism, insulin resistance, diabetes, that type of thing. And then the other category, the one that's often forgotten, is the accidents, right? And then how then does alcohol affect all of those things, right? And if you've got 4 hours, we can go through that. But the short of it is, right, like how does it affect cardiovascular disease? Well, you can take that in any which direction you want. Well, let's just say it's detriment to sleep as a start off and how that impacts. And then you could go through literally all of those things and how that's a problem. I mean, accidents, I don't need to tell you anything about accidents. Like we understand. And I think we've done a great job. Society has done a great job pushing towards not drinking and driving, where it's not nearly an issue that it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. But I think like when we're talking about the association with the alcohol or the alcohol association with overconsumption, which is the part where super gray, no one really knows the answer, right? What does that mean?
Because that's also a very individual answer, right?
It is, right. And we have numbers, like we have this is low intake, this is moderate intake, and this is high intake. And like without boring you about the exact number of grams of alcohol that we need to consume, it gets a little confusing, especially because different countries have a different amount of alcohol that is actually in one drink, right? So when we're starting to think about how much drink is a problem, that's when you kind of need to look at yourself a little bit more, right? And I think when we talk about all those different things that could go wrong from an alcohol standpoint, we have a lot of this information, and it's one of those things that, understanding those risks and how that's be detrimental to you. Most people know. Most people have an idea, and you feel that the next day. You understand that, and that has kind of a blast radius outside of that day, right? It has day after, 2 days later. The disruption of the circadian rhythm, just as a result of that, is a huge impact. And I've seen it in my own life with some tracking that I've done, and you see like, oh, just one drink of alcohol after 5 p.m. for me will impact my sleep, which then has what cascading factors, right? It has issues with the next day. It has issues potentially with the day after, getting consistency of sleep, right? And those things. So, we can go on and on, but I think that like kind of sums up the idea is that we have a lot of detrimental things that come from it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, right? And I think that's what we want to ultimately take away from this is that for some people, and with some of the studies recently have suggested that the older we are and or the more comorbidities, the term we use just to say more medical diagnoses, chronic diseases, the worse it is. And I think that's not necessarily groundbreaking information, right?
Right.
The less your body's able to tolerate, the less you're able to consume.
So it sounds like I'm hearing a couple things from that. And you mentioned, if I have a drink after 5 p.m., before 5 p.m. So there are some healthy lifestyle habits that you can maintain where you can make alcohol a part of it. Sounds like timing is one of them. The other thing you mentioned is the health of your body. So the better condition you keep your body in, the more you're going to be able to tolerate it in a healthy way. Not that I'm saying it's healthy, but including it as part of a overall healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. And this is where it gets confusing because a lot of people are like, the healthier people seem to be able to drink more. And I think this is where we started to see the patterns of like, oh, drinking is okay for living long.
Well, listen, I mean, when I was younger, right, I've been a pretty healthy guy overall, ironically, much more healthy in my 40s than I was probably in my 30s and my 20s. But I wouldn't call myself a chronic drinker, but I definitely knew that I had very few effects, right, from alcohol. And so I might drink 2 or 3, probably not 4, but I would drink a fair amount, right? And thinking I really didn't feel much the next day. Therefore, right, the hypothesis was that it really wasn't causing any damage or really affecting me poorly. Now I know that not to be the case, right? But I would say just from my personal experience, I know that to be true.
Right.
So then the next question I would have is, what is alcohol's true effect on longevity? And I also know that we don't have an exact answer for this, but from your medical background, how is this going to affect us long-term with, Josh and I, our objective is to live as long as possible with the highest possible health we can create for ourselves. Can alcohol still be a part of that?
Yeah. And you're right. There isn't an answer to that. Right. And we wish we had one. And I think over the last 10 years or so, we were thinking that, it's okay to even have some alcohol on a daily basis. And that's something that we're starting to find that maybe that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
But the dose makes the poison, like anything else, right? And that what I've seen over with my patients and things of that nature, and even short periods of time, as I haven't seen my patients for decades long, right? And we start to see that specifically from COVID and the impacts of alcohol consumption, because that went up a lot.
It increased during COVID.
Correct.
People were home a lot more.
A lot, right? They're home a
Garage
lot.
drinking.
Yes, a lot of different things. And that impact was great on a lot of different issues and a lot of different markers that we look at from a longevity standpoint. We think about body composition as an example, the impacts of alcohol on metabolism and visceral fat or belly fat, and how that has impacted their overall health, and then increased their risk for X, Y, and Z other things, right? So now the question is like, does it have a role in terms of longevity? And I think we talked about relationships being a critical piece to this, and that can be something that can facilitate relationships and improve relationships, right? But finding that balance between what is right and wrong is very difficult. And I think that my intention for my patients, and that this isn't always necessarily the case for everybody, is that longevity is something we strive for, but the quality of life is definitely more important. The way we practice medicine currently is very good at keeping people alive, and that is a good thing, right? That's what we're trying to do. But also, what is the quality of life, right? And saying, like, if it's the difference between saying you are not going to drink at all, and as a result of that, you're going to live an extra 4 months, I'm making these numbers up, is that worth it, right? Or maybe it's even less than that. They do studies like this all the time, and it's like, when you think about it, you're like, well, maybe not, right? Maybe I feel like I'm a little bit more in the deprived state, and being like, I'm not sharing in specific moments that might be important, right? So I think it's ultimately a balance and knowing yourself as an individual. And I think that drinking zero alcohol is not necessarily the answer, right?
Right.
Well, one of the things that I do that I think that works for me, right? This may work for other people or not, right? Is I try to be intentional when I make the decision to drink, right? So the first thing that I do, by the way, is I don't drink anything that stinks, right?
I like that.
And I heard somebody else, I don't know if it was Peter or Tia, but I heard somebody talking about, like, you know, they sipped a glass of wine and they didn't think it was good, and they poured the whole bottle down the drain, right? Because it wasn't worth, it wasn't worth, like, if I'm gonna enjoy and really take this moment, you know, to make the choice to ingest, I mean, yes, it's a poison or whatever, right? But let's forego that, because I think that's sort of kitschy, that's clickbaity, right? If we're going to make the choice to have something, you know, like when we were out the other night, I'm like, well, what's in this drink, right? Is it something like, I want it to be a 9 or a 10 out of 10, right? Like, if I'm going to do this, I want to really enjoy it. So I try to make it an intentional experience for myself. Much like I do actually for any meal that I make or anything else, right? I just sort of don't do it to do it. And I think having that sort of mindset to start with sort of sets you down on the right path.
Right. And I think that encompasses not a big part of how I practice, and I share with my patients that I may or may not have shared with you guys, is what I've called the warm cookie theory. And this is exactly what you're talking about, right? Are you going to eat the cookie right out of the oven, or you eat the cookie that's been sitting on the conference table for the last 2 days, right? It's there's no question as to what you're going to do, right? And taking that like method into everything can be really important, knowing that there may not necessarily be a positive in terms of, you know, your health. There's positives in other ways. And a big part of that positive is that moment, right? And enjoying that moment. So question for you. So from the male perspective, right, as part of our longevity journey and part of my personal journey, right, is to keep my testosterone, right? I mean, we bring this up in a lot of episodes, but it's something that is a biomarker that we can use in order to help track how we are aging, right? And so part of my goal on my journey to 120, right, is to keep my testosterone as high as possible for as long as possible without going on TRT or whatever. And I know that there are impacts with alcohol on our hormone balance. Can you just take like 30 seconds to talk about what that is? And I think the first thing to start with that is talk about both genders and talk about fertility. I mean, I think that's a huge problem. And I'm seeing that a really big problem. I mean, people are having kids older, and that's part of it, but also like fertility is a big issue. And one of the things we talk about with our patients is alcohol can't be a part of that, right? And how it impacts the testosterone, which impacts both men and women equally, in that has a really big impact on egg quality, sperm quality, and those things as well. And that, like, if someone comes to me with low testosterone, you know, and I talk to them and they say, well, do I need to take testosterone? And I'm saying, well, we've talked about everything in what you're doing in your life. And I'm saying, well, you come back to me when you're sleeping appropriately, your alcohol is little to zero, and you're lifting, right? And give you 6 months of doing that. We'll check it again and see. And there's just a great impact that we see from that. And that, so the alcohol is impacting that. And that's something that, like, we have to be aware of. And that we talked about this with the sleep, but erectile dysfunction is a really big problem, and it becomes a relationship problem, right? And alcohol could be, you know, while probably small, could be a driver to that, especially in access.
Yeah.
I was just thinking back as you were saying that.
These are heavy.
That was such a moment, because I was thinking back to, you know, before I remember. So I got divorced in my early 30s, right? And I remember being, you know, you get divorced, you end up half time with your kids, right? And so I ended up having half of my weekends free, right? You're not always going out. I would sit with a bottle of wine, or at the time, a gin and tonic was my drink of choice. And, you know, sort of like drinking alone or whatever, and call it drowning your sorrows. And I didn't have any sort of, you know, sort of substance abuse problems. But I sort of think back to that, right? And I just think back to how I felt, right? And it is just, I had a moment there, so I apologize for interrupting in an awkward thing, but it's amazing, because if I compare that to how I feel now, right? And by the way, I'm not drinking, right? I don't drink a lot, and I don't even drink every week, but I don't deprive myself, right? And I think back to how I felt then to how I feel now, and that's almost like an alien. Right? Like, I mean, I really could, now that I know better on the other side, I can feel the effects of what that was doing all around.
Well, and as you're talking about fertility, there's also phases of life where it affects us more and less. So, you know, when people are coming together and, like you were saying, you're dating again, okay, drinks seem to be a real binder. Also when you're younger, but then if your objective is to have children, that's going to affect it differently than if you're older and you're dating again, and you know, socially, or, you know, you're using it as a therapy almost, you know, instead of really addressing the underlying issues, right? And so these are all things.
If you're using alcohol as a therapy, please go see your therapist. That's not something that I don't think any of us, I'm not the doctor here, but I would not recommend that.
No. And what I mean by that is you're not looking at the problem and trying to use something else to ignore the problem, right? And that's an unhealthy habit. But one of the other things that the study addresses is how alcohol actually disproportionately affects men more so than women. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, and we talked about this a little off camera too, and I suspect it's more of a social thing than it is anything else. The other thing is, when you start looking at the ages and the whole, I mean, they came out with a whole report, and you start looking at the ages of people that are being affected. We're talking about the 15 to 19 age group was actually one of the biggest ones.
Interesting. And is that more males specifically in that age group?
Well, it is more males across the board.
But it's still both.
But yeah, it's both. But then you also see that male trend continue into the 20s and 30s. And we're talking about getting into, you know, time of fertility, right? And for a long time, it's always been thought like, well, the man just doesn't have to worry about that, right? And that's
simply not true.
It is not at all. But if you're trying, as you know, to get pregnant, women are being very conscious of that. I mean, I see that women can change habits on a dime for their child, like no questions asked, right? And that it doesn't always change both genders as well, right? And I think that we get back to that question of tolerability too, and that men have a tendency to tolerate more alcohol also,
right?
And therefore more consumption, and therefore more, you know, indecision also. You know, you lose the ability to make good decisions. You're not using your frontal lobe as much, right? You start changing the decisions you make. And I think that's a slippery slope, right?
Right.
If you consume more, it's affecting you more, and then you're not making decisions well, right?
Right.
And that's where, when we start talking about the causes of death in there, you start looking at them, some are from communicable diseases. And you're like, how in the world does that work out, right? There's an increased risk for transmission of HIV as a result of alcohol consumption, right? Just as a standalone, right? So I think that from the men and women perspective, I think you could probably, you know, talk about it over and over and over again. I think it's more social than it is anything else. But it is something that we do need to kind of keep in mind, because we also in our guidelines kind of quote unquote permit men to drink more than women.
Right.
Like moderate amount of drinking is literally 7 to 14 drinks, men versus, women versus men. And that's
a lot of drinks.
That's a lot of drinks, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference between 1 a day and 2 a day.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at some of the averages, it's over 2 a day, and that means there's a lot of people drinking a lot, right? That even more than 2 a day.
Yeah. I also wonder, this isn't necessarily addressed in the study, but from a woman's perspective, I know that the more I drink, the more unsafe it becomes for me.
Yeah.
And so just consciously, I'm making that choice when I go out. I don't want to drink as much because I want to maintain my cognizance and be able to keep myself safe.
Right.
Whereas maybe men don't think of it in that way as much.
That's true. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I've got a daughter who is not yet of drinking age, right? But that's actually something that I've had in my head as I've thought about her getting ready to go off to college and whatever. Like, how do I have these conversations to actually speak to that exact thing, right? And to keep her safe. Just switching over real quick.
Sure.
So one of the things we talked about how this is affecting, fertility, potentially, stuff as we're in our 30s, maybe some 40s. But as we age, right, one of the things that I've read is that our ability to process that byproduct, right? So if anybody doesn't know what happens, you drink, the alcohol gets broken down into toxins. What you're actually feeling is not the alcohol, it's the toxins, all that kind of stuff. So,
and your liver's doing all this work.
And it's doing all this work. How does our ability to process through that? So independent of men and women, but now talking about age, how does that change as we get older?
And this is interesting because the data is not completely clear. And I think a lot of times we think that it gets worse over time. And I think sometimes we feel that. And the data is unclear. And I say that because a lot of times everyone's like, well, the older we get, it's not as good for us, right? Or we're not able to process it. We feel the hangover more and those things. And actually what's been found is that people drink less as they get older, not necessarily always that the alcohol has more of an impact. But when you drink less and you then drink more, right, you're kind of run into this problem that where, like, although I have to say a study within the last month came out talking about how there may be a link to increased mortality in those over the age of 60 that are drinking more. And that's so there's a signal there, right, that says, directionally as we age, we might not be able to tolerate as much. And this is the same for like sleep, for example. Like, we need to sleep more as we get older, right? We didn't talk about that much, but when you think about that, think about your body's tolerance to things, right? And we talk about exercise, and we've talked off camera, like what's the VO2 max and understanding this and thinking like when someone goes to the hospital and they're 95 years old and they have pneumonia and they pass away from that, like that is a threshold problem, right? That is the body didn't have enough to amount the response it needed, right? So oftentimes what we see is that in the older population, we start to see the ability not to be able to handle it as much. And as a result, then represents more issues even over in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Yeah. And so that's where over time, the effects of these lifestyle choices start to compound and then actually contribute to a shorter lifespan.
Right. Yeah.
And so keeping that in mind, how do we increase longevity while keeping in moderation alcohol use and, things that go along with that?
I mean, it's everything else, right? I mean, it's not falling into partially the trap of what alcohol can do to you and regular consistent consumption, because in the same way exercise helps you regularly consistently, alcohol will hurt you regularly consistently, right? So it's like having that and that piece, and like we're thinking about longevity and how to go over that. It's, I think I like mentioned getting in the alcohol trap, and now some people, and I think we have to make a statement on this anyway, saying like some people don't have the choice, right? And those are the people that need to seek help. Those are the people that we need to kind of have conversations with. And these are people that I see on a regular basis. And I see people that like, they've come to me because their interest is in longevity. Their interest is in health span, but they cannot get out of that as a result of addiction. And that's something that like, when we're talking about this, we're kind of freely saying, well, you need to make a choice, right? And that is important. But at the same time, like some people cannot. And if you're not doing well in that regards, that's when you need to start having the conversation with somebody. And that's not just you going to your doctor, that's you talking with your family, that's you doing a lot of different things, right? So like in the spectrum of like living a long time, like there's a place for it. And we're never going to have a signal that says, just a little bit of alcohol is going to cause you to live 5 years shorter, right? So I think, finding that balance isn't an answer to this question, but You know, I mean, I think we need to be very conscious and aware that if we have the ability to make these decisions, like most people do, then we're kind of making, I guess, I hesitate to say better, but we're making the better choice, right? Which is to be very aware of its impact on your day to day, because the day to day and the kind of the rhythm you're in really has a long-term impact also.
Yeah, and that's where really having that awareness of really what we're talking about empowers each one of us to individually make that choice when we're capable of it. And like you said, not everybody is, but knowing for yourself, am I capable of making this choice? And how do I make it in the healthiest way?
Yeah.
And asking yourself, am I capable of this? And if the answer is no, like you said, that's a different situation. Yeah.
So I think we can probably start wrapping up, right? I think, to me, the big takeaway here is there is no amount of alcohol that you're going to drink that's going to make you live longer, right? Yeah. By the same token, we don't know what the right amount of alcohol is to intake in order for it to sort of like be at that small risk, right? We know that it probably is not a lot, right? Like a lot of alcohol is not something that is going to be prolonging our life, and it is something that's going to be reducing our lifespan, right? But I think we really want to encourage people to say, hey, listen, there is some amount of moderation here. And again, moderation is a large word, but there's some amount of intentional, maybe we should call it intentional use. There's some amount of intentional use, right? That will enhance your joy. I mean, I think part of, you know, like for me, I don't want to live to 120 and be, you know, being drug around in a wagon, right? Like that's not my idea of a good time. I want to be joyful, right? At 100. And so there is probably some amount of intentional alcohol consumption that's going to be part of my journey, right? And that's okay. So when I talk with my guys at the club about playing paddle and enjoying some beers or whatever, there's some amount of that that's going to be okay, right?
So that also means that, you know, you're not being drug around in a wagon, but you're also not the stickler that's staunchy about everything and nobody wants to hang out with.
That's right. I mean, I've gotten this from a lot of people in my circle, right? Who will be like, oh, you're not having a good time at the party or whatever. You know what? I can have a good time with just one drink. I don't necessarily need 5.
Right.
And you know, this is also another issue I want to bring up is when there's that social pressure. And what if we all could just respect everybody's tolerance for drinking, because we are individually trying to find where that is. So do you have to drink to have fun? No.
Right.
Do you have to have fun and drink?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
But for each individual, you know, and sometimes it's one of those things where if somebody else is not drinking and you're drinking a lot, you feel uncomfortable, so you want to encourage others to drink, right? Like that's what I'm kind of hearing in that. And that's also another issue, but like being aware of that too, and really respecting people's choices around alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you guys summed it up pretty well. I mean, when we're talking about, I think a lot of this was driven by the social aspect of it. And we talk about a lot of people going through college experiences, and that is a part of, you know, it's socially acceptable, you know, substance use disorder. I mean, that's what we see, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that then rolls over into what we, you know, call adult life, right? And that it's difficult then to be at that point and make those decisions. And I think that we've come such a long way with addiction that I think we're getting there, right? But there still is a little bit of a stigma here, and that says like, oh, you're drinking that much, right? And that we have to kind of find that balance in each individual. And I think that like, it's exploring your individual journey, right? And trying it. Like, what happens if you don't drink for a couple of weeks? What happens if you don't drink for a night? Like, how does that impact you? Like, did it really impact your night in that much of a way? And I think sometimes we learn that. Oftentimes we feel that pressure, and we talked about this off camera, like we feel that pressure for the first drink.
Right.
Right. And then it goes away.
Yeah.
You know,
well, and we know the data, right? The data says the more you drink, the more you want to drink.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So it is sort of, it is the literal epitome of a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've all been there.
As a mom, I cringe at that. It's socially acceptable to drink during college in those years. And I get that, you know, it's kind of this untalked about expectation that, oh yeah, kids do that. But, you know, again, this is why we're wanting to increase awareness around this, because should that really be socially acceptable? Like, what if we taught our young people how to really be responsible and respect each other's alcohol consumption? And then the other factor that's obviously really important to Josh and I is that as you increase the ability of your body to maintain a healthy lifestyle, building muscle, getting the right sleep, you know, those are the factors that really increase your longevity. That's what we teach. If you join us in our 12-month program, we go into all of these topics in detail. But the more you can maintain that also, and I'm not projecting that more alcohol is better or good, but the more alcohol you are capable of responsibly choosing into if you so choose.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway for me, right, in the program is to give yourself permission. And so that's one of the things that we teach, right, in the Becoming Young program. Yeah. No matter what topic we're talking about, whether it's exercise, whether or diet, of which this is a part. For me, I have my own guardrails, right, over what I'm not 100% compliant with anything, right? But I figured out the balance for how to make sure, because a lot of people, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, and this is a whole other podcast, but going into, compliance and the psychology on people are super into, I mean, it's the January gym phenomenon, right? Where people go to the gym, they're super intense for like 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then they fall off because they're so intense that they sort of burn out. So finding that balance is what we're talking about here. And it really is important to just apply that kind of thing to all kinds of different parts of your life.
And one of the things that we talk about with my patients all the time is like, we're after sustainability with all of this, right?
Right.
And sometimes, I'll tell you the most common question or goal for people is they want to lose weight. That's easily the most common, even if they don't need to, which I find is a very interesting phenomenon, but like that's always the goal, right? And then the question becomes, are we doing what we need to be doing in order to do that? And how do we do that, right? And oftentimes it's a matter of finding that threshold we need to get to in order to make the change. But I can do that with pretty much anybody, but is it sustainable, right? Right? Because that becomes the most important piece and we do this with exercise also. If I put you on an exercise plan and in 3 months, you're like, that was horrible. Like
you're not going to maintain.
Yeah, we didn't do a good job of creating a good sustainable model for you. And I think that's where people get caught up in the moderation question. And a lot of times they get caught up in the moderation trap, which is you didn't meet the threshold. But you're like, I'm doing something, but maybe it isn't enough, right? And I think that's where each individual person, and I have a patient that I see now who stopped drinking alcohol and eating bread and lost 90 pounds, and it was like, that's all he did, right? And I was like, that's pretty cool, right? He found his threshold. Did he need to completely eliminate alcohol? I don't know the answer to that, but he made that decision and he did it, and his health is so much better for it now, right? And that's something that every time we're thinking about creating a plan, and that's something that like every time you talk to a client or a patient, it's like, what do we really think is and that's why you just need to know the person, right? These relationships become so important in that, like, I can give you a plan right now that's going to be a healthy amount of alcohol to consume. Is it going to work for you? I have no idea.
Maybe not. And in that, if a patient's goal is weight loss, we could probably universally say that alcohol is not going to help with that goal.
No, and I can probably give you like 8 things as to why, right?
But that's also where, like, as you're working in tandem with your healthcare provider and creating a healthy plan, sometimes you go without alcohol for a period of time to create a new threshold for yourself. And you will inherently know, what are your goals and what do you want to do, and you'll be able to answer that question.
Dr. Saunders, Tyler, thank you for being with us today. This is an awesome topic, one that I think we danced around appropriately, and hopefully I will not get a hard time from the guys at the Racket Club on this.
Hopefully not.
So we look forward to having you back again. Make sure you guys check us out on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, becomingyoung.io. If any of the stuff that you've heard today is resonating with you, come check us out. Give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe, and check out our program. We think that this is stuff that is it's going to improve your life. So until next time, we can't wait to see you. I need to take a moment to remind you that we're not doctors. Our engaging chats, deep insights, and the wealth of knowledge delivered by our guest experts, including doctors, are all designed to empower your journey towards a vibrant life. But it's crucial to note, this isn't medical advice and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. We're here to inspire and inform based on our experiences and the insights of our guests. If you're facing health issues or have medical concerns, always consult a healthcare professional directly. They're your go-to for advice tailored specifically to your individual health needs. Consider our discussions as food for thought on your adventure. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay engaged on your journey to becoming young.